Emma learned the weight of silence long before she learned how to name it. In the early years of her marriage, silence had felt like rest. George would come home late, his tie loosened, eyes tired, but shining with the kind of ambition Emma had once admired. He would kiss her forehead, murmur thanks for dinner, and fall asleep almost as soon as his head touched the pillow. Emma would lie awake beside him, listening to his breathing, convincing herself that this was what love looked like when it matured. Quiet, dependable, unremarkable. 15 years later, the silence had grown heavy. It pressed against her chest in the mornings when she woke alone and in the evenings when she set the table for two. Knowing she would clear one plate untouched, George was a successful entrepreneur now. He owned a growing logistics company, employed dozens of people, and spent his days in meetings that spilled into nights. He was proud of what he had built, proud that Emma never had to worry about money. The house they lived in was large, tastefully furnished, and spotless. Emma made sure of that. Their clothes were always new, their refrigerator full, their savings secure. "You don't need to work," George had told her years ago, his voice firm but not unkind. "I earn enough for both of us. I want you to focus on the home." On us. At the time, Emma had agreed. She had left her job at a small publishing office, telling herself it was temporary. Days turned into months, months into years, and gradually the world beyond the house narrowed. Friends drifted away, conversations became brief and polite. Emma's life revolved around errands, cleaning, cooking, and waiting. Waiting was the hardest part. The neighbour moved in one grey Tuesday morning in early autumn. Emma noticed the moving truck while watering the roses along the fence. It was an ordinary truck, slightly rusted, the logo faded. A man stood near it, sleeves rolled up, lifting boxes with practiced ease. He moved differently from George, less hurried, more grounded. When he set a box down, he wiped his hands on his jeans and looked up, catching Emma watching. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Hi," he said finally, smiling in a way that seemed both shy and open. "I'm Stephen, just moved in." Emma felt oddly flustered. "Emma," she replied. "Welcome to the neighbourhood." That should have been the end of it. A polite greeting, a brief exchange. But as she returned to the house, she realised her heart was beating faster than usual, and she couldn't quite explain why. Over the following weeks, their paths crossed more often than coincidence could easily explain. Stephen worked as a builder, taking contracts where he could find them. Sometimes Emma saw him early in the morning, loading tools into his van. Other times he returned home covered in dust, shoulders slumped with exhaustion, yet he always greeted her with the same warm smile. They began to talk. At first, it was about small things: the weather, the neighbourhood, the stubbornness of the old fence between their yards. Stephen fixed the loose board one afternoon without being asked. Emma brought him a glass of water, then coffee. Conversation flowed easily, surprising them both. Stephen spoke of his work without complaint. He had started young, learning the trade from his father, who had worked himself into an early grave. Stephen had promised himself he would work hard but not lose himself entirely. Still, life hadn't been kind in other ways. Relationships came and went. He admitted, with a rueful laugh, that he never seemed to say the right thing at the right time. Emma listened, more closely than she had listened to anyone in years. In turn, Stephen listened to her, not just to her words, but to the pauses between them. He noticed how she hesitated when speaking about her life, how she often minimized her own feelings. George noticed nothing. When Emma mentioned the new neighbour over dinner one evening, George nodded absently. "Builder, huh? Good to have someone handy around. If he causes any trouble, let me know." "He won't," Emma said softly. As autumn deepened, Emma found herself looking forward to the moments she spent outside. She began taking longer walks, lingering in the garden. Stephen was often there too, working on his house, fixing things that didn't strictly need fixing. Sometimes they walked together down the street, talking about books Emma loved and places Stephen had dreamed of visiting but never had the chance to. With Stephen, Emma felt seen, not as a role, wife, homemaker, caretaker, but as a person with thoughts and longings that had been dormant for too long. The guilt came quietly at first. At night, lying beside George, Emma replayed her conversations with Stephen, wondering when exactly friendliness had shifted into something more dangerous. She told herself she had done nothing wrong. She hadn't crossed any lines. Yet her heart seemed to recognize Stephen before her mind was ready to admit it. George, for his part, grew increasingly distant, though he insisted everything was fine. "Just a busy quarter," he said when Emma asked if something was wrong. "It'll calm down soon." But it never did. The first real crack came one evening when Emma suggested she might like to take a part-time job. "Just something small," she said carefully. "I miss working. I miss using my mind." George frowned, clearly irritated. "Why now? We've been over this. There's no need." "It's not about need," Emma replied. "It's about me." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "You have everything, Emma. Why are you making problems where there aren't any?" She had no answer that he would accept. Winter arrived early, bringing cold winds and long nights. Emma and Stephen's meetings became less frequent but more intense. When they did see each other, their conversations stretched late into the evening, standing by the fence, breath visible in the air. One night, Stephen looked at her with unusual seriousness. "Emma, can I ask you something? You don't have to answer if you don't want to." She nodded. "Are you happy?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Tears sprang to her eyes before she could stop them. She shook her head, then laughed weakly. "I don't know. I thought I was supposed to be." Stephen said nothing, but his silence was different from George's. It was patient, full of space. "I don't want to be the reason you're unhappy," he said quietly. "But I don't want to pretend I don't care either." Emma went home that night knowing she had reached a point of no return. The following weeks were agonizing. Emma tried to reconnect with George, suggesting dinners out, weekends away. He brushed off her attempts, always distracted, always tired. When she finally told him she felt lonely, he reacted with disbelief, then anger. "Everything I do is for us," he snapped. "For you. And this is how you repay me?" "I didn't ask for this life," Emma said, her voice breaking. "I asked for you." The argument ended with slammed doors and unspoken words. George slept in his study that night. Emma knew she had to choose. The choice wasn't simple or romantic. It was messy, painful, filled with fear. Leaving George meant leaving security, familiarity, and 15 years of shared history. Choosing Stephen meant uncertainty, the risk of disappointment, the judgment of others. But when Emma imagined her future with George, all she saw was more silence. When she imagined it with Stephen, she saw struggle, but also warmth, laughter, and a sense of being alive. She told George the truth one cold morning, her hands trembling. He was stunned, then furious, then strangely calm. "You're making a mistake," he said finally. "He has nothing to offer you." Emma met his gaze, tears streaming down her face. "He offers me himself." She packed a single suitcase and walked out of the house that had never truly been a home. Stephen was waiting when she arrived, not with promises or grand gestures, but with open arms. "Whatever comes," he said, holding her close, "we'll face it together." The road ahead was uncertain. Money was tight. Doubts crept in during sleepless nights. But Emma felt something she hadn't felt in years, a sense of choice, of agency, of love that was imperfect but real. And for the first time, the silence no longer frightened her.